Dig deeper and analyze text. In today's lesson, we will dig deeper into our text, My Brother Martin. We will use reasons and evidence in text to identify an author's purpose. We're going to explain how an author uses those reasons and evidence to support points in a text. We're going to recognize and explain the meaning of idioms. Some terms that we will discuss today are author's purpose, historical event, and an idiom. Author's purpose is the reason an author writes something. A historical event is something that happened during a particular time, and an idiom is a phrase that means something different from what the individual words say. On page 62 in our Journeys text, you just read a biography about Martin Luther King, and we're going to use that biography to determine the author's purpose. So let's go ahead and read this page. You follow along as I read. Author's purpose. My brother Martin describes Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s childhood in Atlanta. Why do you think his sister Christine wrote this biography? What was the author's purpose or the reason for writing it? To answer, notice the particular points the author includes and the reasons and evidence used to support them. Putting together these details can help us determine the author's purpose. And so now we're going to go back and look at page 56 in our text and see if we can reveal the author's purpose. Specifically, we're going to look for what does the author say about the laws in her city when she and her brothers were growing up. Okay, here is page 56. Follow along as I read. Looking back, I realized that it was only a matter of time before the generations of cruelty and injustice that Daddy and Mother Dear and Mama and Aunt Ida had been shielding us from finally broke through. But back when it was a crushing blow that seemed to come out of nowhere. Why do white people treat colored people so mean? ML asked Mother Dear afterward. And with me and ML and AD standing in front of her trying our best to understand, Mother Dear gave the reason behind it all. Her words explained the streetcars our family avoided and the whites only sign that kept us off the elevator at City Hall. Her words told us why there were parks and museums that black people could not visit and why some restaurants refused to serve us and why hotels wouldn't give us rooms and why theaters would only allow us to watch their picture shows from the balcony. In this selection, the author says that segregation laws resulted in indignity and injustice and pain for the African Americans. She says that African Americans couldn't go to the movies or ride in the streetcars. Let's delve deeper into what her purpose could be for writing this selection. Okay. Sometimes we're going to use this little graphic organizer with the rectangles over here to help us. In the first box, let's write one of her reasons, and this would be called evidence, okay, because it comes right from our story. Segregation laws resulted in indignity and pain for African Americans. That is one of the reasons. Another reason that supports this is African Americans couldn't go to movies or ride streetcars. So those are some reasons. Now, what do you think what do you think her purpose could be for writing this story? Especially this selection. What would her purpose be? I think it's to inform people of how unfair and hurtful the laws were. We're going to go back to page 63 in our Journeys text. And let's look a little bit at this page and read it as I read it to you. We're going to explain historical events. Authors of biographies tell not only about a person's life, but also about the historical events that took place during that person's life. Remember, a biography is a true event, okay? To understand historical events, think about information in the text that tells about what happened and why. For example, in My Brother Martin, the author says that her family rarely went to picture shows. This was because of laws that kept black people separate. So for us to understand historical events, we have to, as a reader, we must think about what happened and why. When we were young, all children along Auburn Avenue played together, even the two boys whose parents owned the store. And then remember they were white. And since our house was the favorite gathering place, those boys played with us in our backyard and ran with ML and AD to the firehouse on the corner where they watched the engines and the firemen. The thought of not playing with those kids because they were different, because they were white and we were black, never entered our minds. Well, one day, ML and AD went to get their playmates from across the street just as they had done 100 times before. They came home alone. The boys had told my brothers they couldn't play together anymore because AD and ML were Negroes. And that was it. Shortly afterward, the family sold the store and moved away. We never saw or heard from them again. So why do you think the white children were no longer allowed to play with AD and ML? Think about the author's purpose that we discussed in our last slide. During this time in history, segregation laws kept white people and black people apart. Okay? So this is an example of how a historical event really shaped Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life. Therefore, it was very important to add it into his biography. Let's turn to page 63 again in our Journeys book, and I have that up here on the screen. Let's talk about idioms, okay? And remember, an idiom is a phrase that means something different than what the words are actually saying. An idiom is a phrase that means something different from what the individual words suggest. For instance, Mr. King could have bitten his tongue when he was pulled over by the police officer, but instead he spoke out. The idiom biting his tongue means keeping quiet. Idioms help make ideas more powerful. There's another idiom that actually ended the story that we talked about, and it says, "That turned the whole world upside down." Okay, what does this idiom mean? What does it mean, change the world what does it mean that it turned the world upside down? Well, it means to change the world in a big and dramatic way. But why do you think this is such a powerful expression? Well, it shows that the change will be widespread and the change will disrupt a lot and affect a lot of people. Okay? And we'll be learning more about idioms as we go through this year's lessons.